Welcome to the Bigger Cash Flow podcast, where we interview business owners and real estate investors that share tips and tricks on how to grow your cash flow and reach financial freedom.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is Bo Kim with the Bigger Cash Flow podcast, joined by my co-host, Joe Kim. And this marks our very first episode of the Bigger Cash Flow podcast. And to kick things off, we thought it would be great to take turns interviewing each other and get to know a little more about the hosts of the podcast. So today we'll be interviewing Dr. Joe Kim. Joe is a doctor by day and an investor by night. And today he wants to share something he calls white people money. So without further ado, let's welcome Joe to the show. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, Bo. Hey, thanks for having me as your first guest, as well as your co-host.
Yeah, let's start things off by introducing yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a physician at Kaiser in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I've been investing in real estate since 2013 as a side gig or on the side while I do my full-time job. So this investing is not what I do full-time, but it's something that I really enjoy doing, I'm excited about, and really think that this is an important part of how I create wealth and also build a future for my family.
Nice. So how did you get started in real estate investing? So it seems like real estate is your primary driver of your cash flow on the side, right?
Yeah, most definitely. And I started, honestly, uh, way back in 2009 when I became an accidental landlord. It was during the deep recession, and I had to basically rent out my house because I was underwater, like a lot of people at that time. And I had no idea that that actually meant that I had become an investor. So I rented the house, and I had to move to a new job up in the San Francisco Bay Area for my fellowship. So that's when I actually started, but I had no idea that that's what I was actually doing, is becoming a landlord and investor. Um, but really, after that, I got my very first real job as a full doctor at Kaiser in the Bay Area. And I want to talk a little bit about white people money. And that's my introduction to what investing is all about.
Yeah.
All I knew about investing was honestly just stocks. As I was a resident, I didn't have any money to invest, but I did know about stocks a little bit, and I would play the market and not do very well at all.
Mm-hmm.
But my friend at work, we used to carpool together when we first started Kaiser, and he would talk about this thing called white people money. And he was not white, and I was not white, so we weren't trying to be racist, but he was trying to explain to me what he understood about investing. And in a nutshell, he was trying to describe what it meant to have generational wealth. People who have invested money in this country and for themselves and their family, and have wealth that's transferred from one generation to another. And he felt that one of the best ways is to do real estate. And not just real estate, but also stocks and bonds and other kinds of investing as well. So he just called that whole thing white people money. And especially because he felt that as immigrants, he's an immigrant himself, we don't do that very well. We're taught to, go to school, get a good education, get a job, and then you'll be fine. And that's about it. And there's not much you're taught about retirement. You're not taught about investing or savings. And so when he shared that with me, it really, lit up a light bulb in my head.
Yeah. I mean, I resonate a lot with what you just said because basically, the latter part of what you said is kind of a recap of the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, which is, the book that I attribute my start and how I was motivated to, look beyond just getting a good job and investing in the 401k and creating steady passive cash flow is, thinking outside of that box of what we're taught as immigrants. So yeah, I resonate a lot with what you just said. What are some action steps that you took to educate yourself and get started?
So I have this very long commute to work, about almost an hour, 50 minutes each direction. And so I started to listen to podcasts on the way to work. And I listened to podcasts about investing, especially actually, I listened to a lot of podcasts about online investing. That was something that I was really interested in. But at the same time, I listened to, Bigger Pockets. I listened to this guy named Jason Hartman. He had a podcast on real estate and various other podcasts on real estate investing. And I felt this strong desire to get started, but I had no idea to get to that first property. And it was just feeling like this helplessness with all this knowledge in your head, like, oh, this sounds great. You could do all this stuff and create all this wealth, get positive cash flow, doing buy and hold rentals. But I still felt powerless to actually take my first steps. But I had this great fortune of meeting up with one of my buddies from college, just for, we haven't seen each other for maybe 10 years. And he wanted to get together and just have a meal together. So I met with him and we just started talking, and I just told him, hey, I've been listening to these podcasts about real estate. And I'm really wanting to get started. And he started laughing and started to share with me that he's been doing it for the last 5 years. And he just said, hey, there's this turnkey provider in Houston, Texas. Why don't you check him out? And I've been investing with him. And so that's how it all started. It was just that one tip from a friend who's already done it before. And he just gave me a phone number, an email address, and there I went. That year, I flew to Houston and bought myself 2 turnkey properties in 2013.
Oh, wow. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about those first couple properties. Kind of what were the things that you were looking for, and how did you, I guess, overcome fears of investing outside of your area, so outside of California, into these Midwest markets?
Well, in terms of fear, I actually did. I mean, I definitely had some fears, but at the same time, because I've been listening to these podcasts, I was so eager to get started that I was definitely, motivated to buy my first property. But I didn't actually know how to evaluate a pro forma that well. Honestly, I remember looking back, and the only things that I really looked at was um, the ROI and the predicted ROI and also the monthly cash flow. So I remember the first property had a monthly cash flow of about $300 a month. And I thought that was pretty decent. And I also looked at the price per square foot. And at that time, the price per square foot was, I believe, around $67 per square foot, which looked like a great deal because, the cost of construction is right around that or even a little bit higher. So I thought it was a great deal buying a property relatively cheap. And so my first deal was $100,000 house in Houston, Texas, that was just flipped to me by a turnkey provider.
A lot of the time when I post on the forums on Bigger Pockets, or on some of the real estate investing Facebook groups, a lot of new people hit me up via private message and ask, how do I get started? And, I always tell them you got to educate yourself first, but then, there is that fine balance between education and analysis paralysis. But it looks like, you did the educating with the podcast, and, when you felt the time was right, you flew over to the Texas market, and then you bought those rental properties. Um, so tell me, how many properties do you currently have? And, any other lessons that you want to kind of share to, new people who are looking to invest, whether it be in their own market or out of state. What's a lesson learned?
So starting in 2013, I bought 2 properties turnkey in Texas. And then in 2014, I bought 3, another one in Texas and one in 2 in Memphis. And so I started to diversify because that's what the podcast told me to do. So I was very good about following whatever I was told, to diversify and not, be stuck in one market, because if that market goes down, then all your eggs are in one basket. So I pretty much, in a span of about 3 to 4 years, quickly went up to 11 turnkey properties, mostly sold to me by turnkey providers. Because I was working my full-time job, my goal was to be as passive as possible, meaning somebody else does the work for me, and I will utilize my, resources, my cash, and buy these properties. What's interesting though is I ran out of cash quite quickly. I mean, nobody has hundreds of thousands of dollars lying around to buy, a lot of these properties that were on average costing about $150,000 for me. So what was really helpful for me is in the second year, I started to uh, use my home equity line of credit. So that was a tremendous help for me because I was able to use the equity that I built in California in my personal home and utilize that and mobilize that money to buy cash flowing properties in out of state markets. And that's exactly what these, podcasts talk about, how that's how you should do it. You should focus on cash flow, and you should focus on how to utilize your equity as much as possible. So that's what I did.
Nice. So you mentioned the term turnkey a couple times there, and for the benefits of the Bigger Cash Flow listeners, can you expand just a little bit on the definition of turnkey, at least what it means to you?
So the definition of turnkey typically means that a so-called turnkey provider will go buy a distressed home, whether it's foreclosed or buy from a wholesaler. They will go then rehab the home, and then they would sell it to an investor like myself. Then they would actually also put the tenant in place. And sometimes they even sell properties with tenants already in place. So a turnkey provider in the investing world of buy and hold is typically somebody who does pretty much all the work for you. All you got to do is qualify for the mortgage and come up with a down payment. So everything else is pretty much done for you by the turnkey provider. But the thing that I really experienced over time, especially, was that this kind of turnkey provider properties were not what they're supposed to be. I mean, they're not what the turnkey provider promised in many different ways. So I really ran into a lot of pitfalls with turnkey properties, largely on, number one, on the quality of the rehab.
Hmm.
Sometimes the rehab wasn't, the quality wasn't very good. Some turnkey providers provide 1 year of guaranteed no repairs. So they'll take care of all the repairs for 1 year. And that's pretty rare, but some turnkey providers do offer that, which was very nice. However, I still ran into a lot of problems after that 1 year in terms of major capital expenditures the very first turnkey property that I bought for 100,000 in Houston. Um, I remember the home inspection had a million problems on it, and that
Right.
kind of freaked me out. But the turnkey provider would tell me like, "Oh, this is how they do it." Like everyone has these kind of problems, and no property is free from a home inspector who's kind of basically trying to nitpick at every little problem because otherwise they may be liable in the future. So I trusted the turnkey provider, and the thing that I kind of stuck to my guns about was the roof. The
Hmm.
roof was in the inspection basically said you probably have less than 5 years left life on the roof. So I tried to negotiate with the turnkey provider to give me a new roof, and he thought, no, there's plenty of life. There's 10 years left on the roof. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you $2,000 credit on the roof. So he gave me a $2,000 credit. Sure enough, after the 1 year, I had to replace the roof.
Wow.
And it cost me $5,500 to
Wow.
replace the roof. So these are the kind of things that I experienced in terms of poor rehab, some broken promises. But that wasn't even the worst of it. That didn't bother me as much the next part. The next part is what really turned me off to turnkey. And that next part is the property management. So a lot of these turnkey providers have two components. They have the sale of the home, the rehab, and then they have the property management portion.
Hmm.
And I felt that the property management side was what really killed turnkey for me. And that's because, the number one way to make money, we're all talking about cash flow, right? Everyone wants cash flow, is to have a good tenant and a tenant who renews every year, um, low or no vacancy, and hopefully no evictions.
Hmm.
However, every single one of those points was not true. So I got bad tenants who destroyed homes. I got bad tenants who did not renew. I had bad tenants who got evicted. I had vacancies almost every year with turnover. And every time there was a turnover, the minimum cost to turn over a home in terms of cleaning, repairs was minimum $1,000. On average, about $2,000. So that means if you're making like $200 a month, positive cash flow for 12 months, that turnover itself, because you're not only you pay the $2,000 repairs and cleaning, you also have to pay the lease up fee, which is another full month of lease up fee to the property manager, and your entire cash flow from the previous year was completely wiped out.
Right.
And then imagine if you have another capital expenditure of fixing a moldy bathroom and
Hmm.
spending $3,000, or spending $5,500 on a new roof, or spending $2,000 on fixing the HVAC system. These are all things that actually happen to me. These aren't just like hypothetical situations.
Right.
So more and more, I found myself encountering these issues with turnkey providers. And so I had to decide, like, what do I do next? Because I really did believe in real estate as a great wealth generator.
Hmm.
And I did get wealth. I mean, I did definitely make money. So for example, that house that I bought for 100,000, um, 3 years later, I sold it for 120,000. So that's a 20% increase in price. But if you actually look at the ROI, because of leverage, you're only putting 20% down. It's actually 100% increase in, value from the down payment that you put in. So it was actually I still made money on that property when I sold it, but I think I got lucky. So this was, it's better to be lucky than good. So I got lucky because I started investing in 2013, which was still the tail end of the recession. And there were still very good prices out there. So I think that helped me a lot to be lucky and to kind of protect myself in terms of mistakes that I made and bad properties and bad property managers.
Wow. Yeah. No, thanks for sharing. I think, what you just shared with our listeners is that, so a lot of the times, what we get marketed to us as real estate investors are, hey, go for the cash flow, lots of positives. There's so many profit centers with real estate investing: appreciation, tax benefits, cash flow, hedge against inflation. And these are all true. But, you meet people like yourself and other investors, um, and you find out that it's not always rainbows and butterflies, right?
Yeah.
There's kind of, there's two sides to a coin. Sometimes turnkeys might work great, right? For me, when I first found out about it, I thought it was the best thing ever, because all this time I thought that I had to be the one, swinging a hammer and try to rehab or flip these properties to myself if I wanted to force that appreciation. But there's ways you can do it yourself with an outside team, but you can also contract, and partner up with companies such as a turnkey provider who will do these things up front for you. But no, thanks so much for sharing that. I know we're gonna dive into more of those stories later down the road. I kind of wanted to ask you, so, if there is a younger version of Joe the investor, what's like the biggest piece of advice that you would give to your younger self? Would you, looking back, are there ways you could have mitigated some of that risk with the turnkey providers, or would you have just not, you know, gone the turnkey route at all? I know you and I, when we talk about real estating a lot, you're really into Airbnbs and short-term rentals. So, what advice would you give your younger self?
So two things. I think it's hard to always look at the retroscope and try to second guess yourself and try to say, I could have done something different. Of course you could have. All of us could have. So I think in terms of investing my first or second property in turnkey was actually a good education, good way to get started, because I certainly didn't have any time to pick up a hammer and start fixing things, or even doing the BRRRR method. I did not have time for that. And I didn't have any experience to be able to do something like that. So I definitely would have said, hey, go ahead and start the exact same way that I did do it, so that I could get my foot into the door.
Hmm.
However, at the same time, I think this emphasis on cash flow only was a mistake, because the amount of work I had to put in to make, in terms of the cash flow and appreciation on the 11 properties that I ended up buying, if I had bought just two properties in the state of California in 2013 or 2014, I actually probably would have made out better. Now, most people would say, well, you can't predict the market. You can't say that the California market would have increased like that. Nobody would have known. And I totally agree with that. That is definitely true, that you cannot 100% predict appreciation. But at the same time, we hit one of the worst recessions, you know, in a generation or two generations. And so that was one amazing opportunity. But I think there will be more opportunities in our lifetime every 8 to 10 years where we do hit a recession and prices do come down. And I think those are great opportunities to go ahead and buy in markets where are going to be appreciating. So that's one thing that I would have done, is focus a little bit more on appreciation and have had a more of a balanced, diversified portfolio with properties in appreciating markets. And then the second thing that I would love to talk about is what I'm doing right now, which is forced cash flow, is what I'm, just like your podcast name, Bigger Cash Flow. So that's what I've been focusing on lately, is how to produce more cash flow with the properties that I have, but also in doing something called rental arbitrage. Um, so you alluded to it before. I actually started investing in Airbnb, and I am so excited about this thing. This is my one thing. This is the thing that I'm focusing on and putting all my energies into right now. And the reason why that is because the fact that I can actually increase my cash flow by putting my work and effort into like forced, instead of forced appreciation, I'm getting forced cash flow. And the way you do that is you furnish a home and you rent it out on Airbnb. You rent it as a furnished rental rather than and furnished short-term rental rather than a long-term 12-month unfurnished home that I have been doing. And I'm incredibly excited about this.
Yeah, no, that sounds awesome. I know you and I have talked about this a couple times, and I'm trying to educate myself a little bit more about this because I think there's a ton of benefits, even on the tax side. Optimizing your portfolio, increasing your cash flow, things like that. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about it. I'm sure we'll have an episode down the road where we talk strictly about short-term rentals and Airbnbs because I'm guessing, once we start talking about it, there's going to be so many nuances where investors need to educate themselves and learn about because it's kind of a different ball game from traditional rentals. Am I correct?
Yeah, it definitely is different. And there is a little bit of more, it's a little less passive than just a buy and hold situation.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think the thing that I really love about this game is that one of the reasons why we do real estate is we have more control. In the stock market, you never know when Elon is going to send that tweet that's going to destroy your stock and drop it by 20% in one day, or the opposite where it goes up 20%.
Right.
But in real estate, one thing is that things move slower, so you can actually see where the market is going. That's great. But you kind of have a control over, hey, I'm going to fix up this house and do a forced appreciation. I'm going to put in the tenant that I want, So there's some control over there in terms of how you can, have a say in the direction of your investment. But Airbnb takes it to a 10x. It takes it to a whole new level in terms of your ability to market this property, your ability to increase your cash flow. And then you can also decrease the vacancy rate by decreasing the price. When you're doing a rental for 12 months, you're stuck at that price. You can't increase the price. You can't decrease the price. Obviously, you don't want to decrease it, but there's no ability to raise the prices during that 12 months. You're stuck at that same price the whole 12 months. So it's very exciting for me. And I love the control. I love the excitement and the fact that I can actually work at my business to grow the business instead of being kind of controlled one way or the other by the tenant. And that's the thing that I really did not like is that, you never know what the tenant is doing for 12 months. They could be destroying your house. They can be ruining their marriage. They could be losing their job and
Yeah.
then eventually evict it. Then you would have never known until it happens, right? So, but with Airbnb, somebody's staying there for 4 days, they leave, and your cleaner goes in and checks the house, and you're like, oh, they took my TV remote, so I'm going to charge them $20 for the TV remote that they took, right? So you get an immediate solution to problems. You find out if there's an issue right away. There's no hidden problems with the short-term rentals, which I love.
Wow. No, that's great. So, our listeners might be wondering, man, this guy said in the beginning of the intro, he's a doctor by day and investor by night. You kind of remind me of Batman because, I'm listening to all these things that you're doing with the traditional rentals, whether it be turnkey, and then now you're doing short-term rentals and Airbnb. How do you find the time to do all this? Because, I work as an accountant and it's very demanding, and you also work as a physician that's very demanding as well. How do you juggle that? And also, what are some of the things that you have implemented? Are there any automation? Do you leverage other people's time? How do you balance that?
Yeah, that's actually a very good, it's a great question. And I certainly don't have all the answers, but I'm definitely working on how to maximize and how to minimize my time involvement while maximizing my business. And I think it's tough because I've only done this business for about 8 months now. So in any new business, you do have to put in a lot of time and effort to learn the business and to grow the business. But I'm definitely transitioning into a mode where I do have co-hosts who manages my properties out in Atlanta and Indianapolis for me. So they take care of the day-to-day bookings and the scheduling the cleanings, dealing with any of the issues that happens with the guests. So that's been tremendously helpful. I also have employed a bookkeeper to keep track of the bookkeeping because, unlike traditional rentals, now you have a ton of transactions coming through, both in the rent money coming in, but also whenever you establish a new rental, you have to actually spend a lot of money and purchase a lot of different items, which you have to keep track of. So I definitely am trying that balancing act of trying to get as much help as I can. But at the same time, I realize that any new business requires some commitment and sacrifice. I'm certainly not spending my time, on too many other hobbies at this time because that's what I'm focusing on. But yeah, more and more I'm trying to leverage other people's time and utilize the money that I'm getting from Airbnb so that my involvement is less moving forward.
Okay. So we're kind of nearing the end of our show this week, and I kind of wanted to ask you, as both hosts of this new podcast, kind of wanted to share with our listeners, why did you want to start a podcast, and kind of discuss some of your goals and what you really want to share with our audience.
So I'm so excited about this podcast. Honestly, this is like uh, one of my kind of dreams back when I was listening to these podcasts, because not only was real estate something that I wanted to do in terms of real estate investing, but podcasting is something that I've always been interested in ever since I started to listen to podcasts. So one of the things I always have this strong desire is I love to share with people. I'm not shy about letting others, my friends and family and colleagues, know about what I'm doing and how excited I am about the real estate investing that I do. So I actually really enjoy that part, is sharing this and kind of giving back to other people. Because honestly, a lot of other mentors, my friend who kind of introduced me to the turnkey provider, he was one of my mentors. And, I think that's kind of a cycle we have in life, is that you receive and you give. So I'm really excited about that. Um, and one advice that I would give to a newbie real estate investor is, number one, you know, pull the trigger. You have to make your first deal. You have to, take that first step. And even if you make a few mistakes, it's okay. Just don't make too many mistakes on your second and third. You continue to grow, right, as you move along. But at the same time, I think that's really important to get started. And the other advice I would say is, um, always be self-aware, because I think getting yourself into trouble is when you extend yourself beyond what you are able to do, because there is plenty of time. And I think if you rush to do deals that don't make sense, you get yourself into trouble, because there are so many deals to be made in the future, and another recession to come, another opportunity out there. There's no reason to just force a deal through. So especially as a newbie, I think that's really important not to do that. I think that's the two things I would definitely pass on.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Um, I really agree with your first comment about, you just got to get that first deal done, because, until then, you're just going to constantly be thinking about, is this the right move? Is this the right deal? What about that million things on that inspection list that I saw, and just worry and never take action. Those people are still probably going to be, worrying about that a year, 5 years from now. So totally agree with you. I think, one of my favorite quotes is fortune favors the bold. So you got to be bold, take some risk, calculate, those risks, but still take action and massive action. So thank you so much. How can people reach out to you, Joe?
There's several ways to reach out to me. One is you can check out my website, www.sesamewaltz.com, and you can send me a message through that site. And also, you can also reach me through the Bigger Cashflow website, which is www.biggercashflow.com as well, since we're doing this podcast together with Bo. So please reach me at those two websites, and I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. And with all this, I will have show notes below the podcast on our website, like Joe said, at biggercashflow.com. And that wraps up our show for this week. If you thought that was helpful, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you may be listening. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Bigger Cash Flow podcast. Please remember that opinions of the guests are their own, and nothing on this show should be considered personal or professional advice. Please consult your tax, legal, or financial advisor for personal advice that fit your unique situation. See you next time.